We know what a dynamic block is now, and we've seen how to use them in a drawing. But how do you make them? There are many different settings that you can apply to a dynamic block. But the first step is to decide what you need to do and how you want to do it, how you want to manipulate your line work, or how it's going to change. Let's keep it very simple for now. So let's start a brand new file. Go to that acat.dwt file, open that up. I'm going to turn my grid off, press F7, and we're going to create a block. Now, all I'm going to do in this case is create a square. It starts off at the 1-to-1 units, width times height, and then we're going to be able to stretch it. And we're going to stretch it, but it's going to keep it as a parallelogram. So we need to go to the Home tab because we're going to make a brand new block from scratch. Now, when you go to make a block, you can do it a couple of different ways. You can draw in a lot of the line work ahead of time and then make that into a block and then edit the block. Or in this case, we're just going to keep it simple. And we're going to go to the Home tab on the ribbon, go to the Block panel, and we're going to go to the Block Editor, or type in BEDIT, or BEdit for Block Edit. Now, we don't have any blocks in this file to choose from to edit, so we're going to create a new one. And I'm just going to call it Square. You can call it whatever you'd like. Click OK. And when you do this, this brings you into the Block Editor environment. Now, you can tell you're there by about 3 different things. One, the background color is going to change. Another way to tell is that it opens up this palette. This is called the Block Authoring Palettes. It's called All Palettes. So this has a lot of different dynamic block creation type tools. You'll also be able to know that you're in the block editor mode because there is a block editor contextual ribbon tab. Now, if you're not using your ribbons, it may be a little bit more difficult to make blocks because you won't have very quick access to all of these different tools. So this may be a case where if you're not using the ribbon, you want to turn it back on. So for a block to be dynamic, it must have a couple of different things, 2 of them, a parameter and an action. And that's where this palette comes in handy. You have parameters right here, and then you have actions. Now you have parameter sets, and this is a really nice function that you can use because it pairs up parameters and actions specifically that go together quite well. And you also have constraints, and we'll talk about those later on in another chapter. However, though, first of all, before you can apply any parameters to anything, you're going to have some line work. So I'm just going to use the rectangle command, press enter. I'm going to start at 0, 0, press enter, and then I'm just going to make it 1 unit by 1 unit. So I pressed in 1, pressed tab, pressed 1 again, and then pressed enter. So this rectangle is just 1 unit by 1 unit long, tall, and high, that sort of thing. So I need to set my parameter. Now, what I want to be able to do is have a block that stays parallel, it stays 1 unit tall, but I can stretch it to whatever size I need, and it needs to all stay in there and stay a square like this, or a parallelogram, actually. So you might just say, well, why can't I just use the stretch command? Well, that's essentially what we're going to do here, but we're going to set it up in the block so that we can just grab a quick grip edit and stretch it along. Remember, this is also an exercise to help you get an idea of what it's like to create a dynamic block. This will be a very simple dynamic block, but you need to be able to take the first couple of steps before you can create the door block that we have that has a lot of different parameters and things into it. So first, you start with a parameter, and the parameters are a little bit different than the actions. A parameter usually has an action associated with it. There are a few exceptions, but parameters define properties in your line work like locations or distances or angles. Now, when a parameter is met, like a certain length or something, then an action goes into effect. That action then defines how the parameter changes within the block. Just keep this in mind when you're creating your dynamic blocks. So we need a parameter first. And you'll notice some of these parameters, like flip and rotation, match up very well with the flip and rotate actions. So the parameters sort of define the unit of measurement or the unit of what's being taking an action on. And the action is kind of like a regular AutoCAD command, like move, scale, stretch, polar stretch, rotate, etc. So we start with a parameter and we want to move these in a line. We don't want to move a point. We don't want to do anything polar or an array. We don't want to rotate. I just want to move things in a line. So I'm going to click the linear parameter. And when I do that, I have to define what the line is from 2 points. So I click on this first point here, and I click on this second point there, just like making a dimension. And then I left click and put it somewhere. This is a parameter. So you can see here that it measures a distance and that it has these little arrows on here. And that's telling you this line is going to be able to move either to the left or to the right, depending on what the action tells it to do. So that's what's going to happen. This distance is going to change. Now, it's very important to keep an eye on this little box here. Because there's an exclamation point in there like that, it's telling me, hey, it's not really associated with anything, and we need to finish adding an action. So now I'm going to go to an action. Now, I could use the scale command in this case. It's going to scale up, but it's going to scale the entire thing. What I want to do is essentially just use the stretch command on this end of my box so I can stretch it out to the right. So that's why I'm picking the stretch action. So I left click on that and I select the parameter. That's this guy here. Select it. And it's asking me to define the point or how to associate the action with. So as I move my mouse around, it's looking at the distances here. So I'm either going to grab it here. This will create the location of the grip. So do I want to stretch it here and move it to the left, or do I want to stretch it here and move it to the right? Well, in this case, I want to stretch it to the right. So I left click on it. Now it asks me for the first corner of the stretch frame. So this is where the stretch command starts. So you'll use this just like you would the stretch command. So I'm going to click here with my left click on my mouse, create my selection window, and everything that's inside this window will be stretched, just as if I used the stretch command. There it is. So now I press enter to finish setting that parameter. And then I have to select my objects. So everything that I want to stretch, including the parameter, I select. Press enter, and there we go. Now you can see here, I have my stretch action. Okay, so now that you've done everything that you want to do to it, you need to test your block. You can come up to your block editor ribbon, and you come up here and you click on the test block option. So this puts you in a state where it's like, hey, I'm using this. It looks like a regular AutoCAD. I can select my block here. Here's my little grip. Click on it. And it stretches. When you're finished and you're satisfied, just come up here to the right on the ribbon and click on the close text block. So it closes the test functionality. And when you're finished, you can just click on the close block editor, or I can click on save block. I can keep editing. I'm going to click on the close block editor, and it's going to ask you if you want to save any of your changes. And so I said yes. So now I'm in this file. I'm going to use the insert command. I'm going to find my block. Just called square. And you notice here it has a little dynamic glyph there, so I know it's dynamic. Click OK, and I've inserted my block. Now when I select it, I have my glyph, and I can stretch it. Quite simple. And I can also, as you'll notice, type in a unit, say that's how long I want it to go, and there it is. That's a regular block, so I can just do block type things to it. I can copy it. I can work with them individually. I can rotate one. And once you rotate it, it'll still stretch the way I want it to. That's the basic idea of making a dynamic block. So you need your line work, you need to set a parameter, and you need to set an action. And you can use some of the tools in there to place both a parameter and an action at the same time, or you can do them one at a time. You can have multiple parameters, you can have multiple actions, you can do a lot of different things inside a block. So for example, if I put in my door here, and I type in bedit for the block editor, and I go to the door, click OK. You can see here, I have a lot of different parameters and different actions. And you can give your parameters different names, and that's a really good idea to do. And you can see here that this guy has a lot of different actions on it. And as you hover over them, it kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. You can see here, this stretch an option and a lot of different things. So you can see this is a lot more complicated than our simple square, but it's all there and we can change it. We can take things out, we can add things in, and we can do a lot of different things. So we're using here a stretch with a linear to make the door width for the wall mount. And then here's the actual door itself. We're using the door size right here. That's what that is. The door swing is the rotate. So there are a lot of different actions and parameters set up in one of these blocks.